Morning, everybody. Crappy Mondays, and welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's Deputy Online Political Editor, Lizzie Buchan. Morning, Lizzie.
Morning.
Sorry we're a bit late, had some technical difficulties, but I think we're through them now. Now, this is the People's Paper Review, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening later on podcast will just have to keep banging your head against that wall and see if that works. So, what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on Dark Ages dentistry on the front page there as protests descend on Parliament today, demanding proper NHS dental care for all. Anyone who's watching, if you've got some particular nightmare stories about your dentistry or dentist, do let us know about them. We'll discuss them later. More on that in a bit. But first off, I've got a story in the paper today. Hooray! So let us turn to page 14, where I'm going to hand over control of the show, and Lizzie is going to ask me what it's all about.
Yeah, real sort of role reversal today. I get to ask the questions, which is nice. So yeah, on page 14, we've obviously got a picture of the Prime Minister laying a wreath and the headline, "Do the right thing and meet us, PM." Susie, do you want to tell us what this is all about?
Yeah, so this is to do with the Mirror's long-running nuclear veterans campaign, which I've been doing for the past 20 years. The Mirror's done for 40. And the picture there is of Rishi laying a wreath at the National Memorial Arboretum about a month after he came to office, about 16 months ago. And that was at a special event with nuclear veterans where he finally delivered the medal we had campaigned for a long time. And when he was there, he met other veterans. He met them, spoke to them, was photographed with them. And Laura, who's in the photographs here, is the granddaughter of one of the veterans, said to him she wanted to have a meeting to discuss the nuked blood scandal, which is how their blood tests from the time of the nuclear weapons trials have all gone mysteriously missing. And such tests would finally prove whether or not they had been irradiated. Now, since then, the campaigners have approached Rishi 12 times for that meeting. They've spoken to his team at Downing Street. They've gone via MPs. They've written letters and emails. I have been WhatsApping people who work in Rishi's main central office. And all of them all those requests have landed with a great sort of resounding, clanging silence. It took 6 months for him to respond to Laura's letter. And when he did, he said how very important the nuclear veterans were to Britain's peace and prosperity, how terribly touched he was at that ceremony, and that he was just too busy to meet them, which kind of is a bit jarring. Well, he's not doing much now, is he, except clinging on for dear life. So we're hoping that finally he will have a reason to sit down and talk to the campaigners and find out more about this scandal.
So where do you think we go with this then? Because obviously it's hard to get... You've got his attention in some ways, but how can you really sort of put the pressure on?
It's getting the attention back, isn't it? More than anything else. He's done this thing, and he seems to think that is enough. Whenever we go to Downing Street or Ministry of Defence with another test veteran story, the quote that comes back is about the medal. It's like, "We did the medal, go away." And just that's not it. Now, with your political hat on for a minute, Lizzie, I'll ask you a question now. Imagine you were Rishi right now, right? Don't cry. But imagine you were Rishi. You're surrounded by people in your party who are plotting against you. You're doing worse in the polls than Liz Truss. You've just given 20 billion away to voters who still don't like you. You're officially less popular than Vladimir Putin. So you're going through the in-tray, looking for anything that might be a bit of good news you could put in the media grid this week. Well, what should we do? HS2, burn that. No, that's not going to work. I've already done that. And why wouldn't you, if you're looking for a positive headline, a bit of good news, why wouldn't you, if you were Rishi, sit down with the nuclear veterans, put on your, oh gosh, how awful face, take all the credit for ending a scandal while leaving the bill with the opposition who are about to take over? I mean, as a political journalist, why do you think he hasn't done it?
I would imagine it's probably just because they, like you say, the walls are pressing in, right? And I think they have he's only got so much bandwidth to sort of focus on anything. And anyone you kind of talk to around Rishi, Conservative MPs and, other MPs from other parties, they all sort of say that it's very hard to get Downing Street to concentrate on anything other than like a very small number of things, which is the economy, stopping the boats. And I think that's pretty much it, because those were the things that Rishi Sunak promised. last year when he made his sort of 5 pledges that he would stop the votes, that he'd basically fix the economy. Another one he promised was that he'd get NHS waiting list down, which he doesn't seem to be focusing on so much. But they're very much in election mode, so they're thinking about these issues. They think that these are the things that are going to try and get them votes. So they're putting everything into that. You could argue that there is time to be found for other things because, you know, we saw last week there were lots of reports about the fact that Parliament's only sitting for it's sitting for like 7 hours a day, which isn't very much. It's rising early all the time. There's hardly any legislative stuff going on. So, you know, MPs are sort of twiddling their thumbs a bit, you know, and whereas Downing Street are obviously in, you know, fighting fires everywhere. So I think that's part of it. And then the other thing I would say is, I think there is an argument to be made for, like, cynically and politically, for taking this on and then saddling the next government with the bill would be. I think the government are they've panicked a bit about the fact that they were forced to really do something about the post office scandal. There's also the infected blood scandal. There's a number of issues where, like, enormous miscarriages of justice have happened, which have left the government with a huge bill, rightly so. I suspect they might be a bit apprehensive about taking steps in this space in case it means that they suddenly end up having to announce another public inquiry or something like that, which, you know, morally they should. But I think that's the kind of cynical political calculation that they're probably making.
They don't want to look like they're being cynical, I suppose, which is their cynical calculation. Now, Steve, who is the son of a veteran, says Rishi is too weak to stand up to the MOD. The MOD are very resistant to releasing the nuke blood files and the medical records. We need a Prime Minister who'll demand the truth. Will Keir Starmer be that man, or will Rishi surprise us and step up to the plate? I don't know, Steve, but Liz has just given me a great idea for our next stunt to get some attention. I think obviously what we have to do is put some nuclear veterans on a small boat in the Channel, and then he might actually pay some attention to what they have to say, although, you know, there's a chance of everyone getting very wet. The lotion on its skin says, is it because he's generally incompetent? He was supposedly a safe pair of hands. He's more like a wet fish handshake. Oh, it's given me the ick. Very quickly, I suppose, to answer Lizzie's question about where we go next from here, is that the lawsuit about the nuke blood files is building and is going to be launching fairly soon. And this is basically an effort to take the government to court in order to force the release of these files, which it says it doesn't have, and then admits that it might have, and then says that you can't have even if they do have it at the MOD. So the court case comes his way. Whether he's cynically trying to avoid one thing or another, it's going to be there. And the longer it takes for a general election, of course, the more likely it is that some of that lands on Rishi Sunak's desk. So I think where we go next, Lizzie, is number one is the court case, and number two is plainly a small boat in the Channel, is where we need to get a photographer and some old men pretty rapidly, because that might actually finally fix it. Right, thank you for that. Well done for your interviewing. She said patronisingly. Now, on to the main story of the day. And this is adding to Rishi's woes, something else that he can't be bothered to fix, which is the state of NHS dentistry. Now, protesters are descending on Parliament today over the fact that almost every dentist in England, most of them, in fact, is no longer taking on NHS patients. Now, here are a few quotes in the piece of what it means. Lizzie, while I actually managed to get around to actually opening them up and actually reading the quotes, there's also about 200,000 signatures, isn't there, and a Mirror petition to actually get this fixed. Is there any chance that Rishi is sort of leaving this sort of dentistry solution up his sleeve to include in a Tory manifesto when we do finally get that election?
I'm not so sure. I mean, as far as I understand it, I don't think they really have their manifesto together. So I don't know exactly what would go in there, but they have announced a sort of dentist plan, and they, you know, the government has promised that they're going to put, I think it's an extra £200 million into dentistry to try and, you know, help people get appointments, to try and get dentists into areas where they're underserved. But I think our health editor Martin Baggett, who's done this piece today, has written that actually it turns out that cash isn't new and it's going to be reallocated from the existing budget. So that's not good news. And, you know, Rishi Sunak went on a visit in the south of England, did several visits in the south of England to promote his dentistry recovery stuff. I think one of them, he went to a dentist to do a photo op, which turned out it wasn't accepting any NHS patients anyway, which is, just a kind of, it gives you everything you need to know about where we are with this. I think the government, you know, they say that they're doing something about it. And Rishi has done several visits. He's talked about this a bit. He always makes a big thing about coming from an NHS family because his parents had a pharmacy. But it doesn't sound like their rescue plan has been met with very much optimism. And I'm not really sure where any other money or sort of political will is coming from in this space, even though actually it's something that really exercises the public. Like not being able to get a dentist appointment is something that you often hear about in polling, in focus groups, or, you know, anecdotally, I hear it in my own life. MPs say it's a big issue for them. So if I was number 10, I would definitely be doing something about this, but I don't know. I don't know whether we're going to get anything more than this kind of slightly paltry offer that they've already made.
Yeah, it's that political will thing, isn't it? What do you think, everybody? Have you had problems getting an NHS dentist? Have you had problems finding treatment or being able to afford treatment? Leslie says, isn't dentistry an example of the way the whole of the NHS is going? Hip replacements being done by Asda. Well, let me just read out some of the quotes. This is what people are actually experiencing as a result of the dentistry crisis. So it says in the article here, Alan Raymond from Southport says, I've not been able to see a dentist in 5 years. I've removed one tooth with a screwdriver and another with pliers. Michael Hodge from Liverpool said, I had to pull out one of my wisdom teeth with a pair of sterilised pliers. Elizabeth Johnson-Iden from Somerset, I can't get an NHS dentist. I can't afford to go private. I'm living on painkillers and fear. There's another couple, Brian Maskell from Totnes in Devon. It takes a round trip of 200 miles to reach our dentist. I've got advanced prostate cancer. And Alison Curley from Sunderland. I've lost my confidence, my smile, and my faith in the system. My health has suffered with weight loss because I can't eat properly. Now, the British Dental Association, which is sort of the trade union, I suppose, for dentists, is saying that the choices that are being made in Westminster has left people across the country just taking these matters literally into their own hands, going down the shed, finding a screwdriver or a pair of pliers to do something, and that dentistry's gone back to the dark ages. It's this issue, really, isn't it, of political will, it seems. And how else do you find the political will except when there's an issue which affects huge swathes of the country, millions of voters, there are protests outside Parliament, there's a 200,000 name signature on a mirror petition. That is, one would have thought, where you find the political will. Just cynically, if everyone is shouting at you about it, there comes a point where you have to give your attention to it, isn't there? Yeah,
absolutely. I think the problem is that there is so much that is broken now. There is so much, there are so many different issues that over sort of 14 years of Conservative-led governments, services that have started to sort of, services that started to collapse, miscarriages of justice, issues that have been rumbling on for a really long time. I think that I'm not underplaying this in any way. I think that what's happening in dentistry is a total scandal. And it is, you can see just from looking at those stories of awful things that people are having to do. But I think the problem is that the government's sort of playing whack-a-mole. It doesn't have the bandwidth to sit with anything for a long time. They're in panic election mode. They're constantly firefighting. Rishi, over the last few days, there's been talks about plotting, about, of varying levels of veracity around, whether he's going to face a leadership challenge or not. There's that sort of stuff tends to really clog up what Downing Street are trying to do. And one of the problems is that if Downing Street are very controlling, which Rishi's number 10 is, it makes it hard for any other departments to really do anything without their say-so. And so it means that, you might have, in the Department of Health, they might be very keen to get on with this. They're probably, the health secretary is very keen to to cut waiting lists, to do all of that sort of thing. But there's only so much that they can do without the say-so of either Number 10 or the Treasury. And the Treasury is saying there's not a lot of money for anything, we're not going to help you. And Downing Street just don't seem to have the capacity to get behind things and push for them, because they're constantly sort of trying to figure out whether Rishi can turn the polls around, whether he can keep his MPs in line. And I think one of the commenters made a good point. Rishi is he is quite weak. It is difficult for him to stand up to the Ministry of Defence and to other departments and to stand up to other members of his cabinet, because he doesn't have a lot of political capital. Yeah. So, it is difficult. I think everyone in this space who's campaigning for it is doing all the right stuff, protests, petitions, engaging with your MPs. This is the way that things get done. But I think sometimes it just is a case of right place, right time. And sometimes an issue just catches the imagination, and then you can affect some change. But otherwise, it can just be a real slog for a long time, as you just described about the nuclear test veterans, just slogging away for years to prove, as with the post office scandal as well. People were campaigning on that for so many years without really getting anywhere. And then suddenly it happens. So keep fighting the good fight.
Yeah, well, it seems like a lot of us seem to be fighting the good fight, whether it's about your dental health or your children's schools or nuclear veterans or anything else. And what's quite almost upsetting there in a way, because we all live in this country as well, is that you just described this horrible sort of vacuum in Whitehall of a prime minister who's not very strong, is a party that can't decide what it's doing, a Whitehall and a civil service that isn't allowed to freelance or do anything without his approval, and he's incapable of approving things. Leslie says they'll be wanting our children to fight their wars without force their attention and political will towards improving our health. Although people might think, well, it's just a dentist checkup once a year or something, your dental health is hugely indicative of some other problems. And if a dentist can sort of fix your teeth and give you regular checkups and keep an eye on some things, whether it's oral cancers that come in, whether it's nutritional issues, it can have a massive impact. I mean, there's a big correlation between gum disease and heart disease, for example. So if a dentist can help you tackle gum disease, they might be saving the NHS thousands of pounds later down the road for treatment for coronary heart disease. There is a massive reason to get this sorted. And it's sort of astonishing that it doesn't really seem to be happening. One of the things you said earlier on, Lizzie, was that the Tories have announced this extra, what they have called an additional £200 million. And as you said, it's money it's already committed. So they clearly need to recheck the definition of the word additional. A lot of that is a 20k bung to any dentist to go to set up in an area where there isn't any provision at the moment. And when you have something like dentists, which is sort of half in, half out of the NHS, sometimes they're allowed to do lots of private work and so on, and they get paid for the NHS work they do, you'd think that sort of capitalist incentive wouldn't be necessary, because, if you have a capitalist or semi-capitalist model, they would already want to be in the place where there aren't any other dentists, right? It's like saying to me, do you want to be in the only place do you want to be the only person who is able to provide commentary or political commentary services somewhere? You go, yes, thank you very much, I'll clean up, I'll take it all. But there is no better place for a dentist to be than in a town where there is no dentist. So if they've got to provide 20k bung to go there, then it's broken to start with, isn't it, really? And what are Labour suggesting? Have they got any big solutions for this, or are they likewise a bit, we don't know what to do?
I think Labour have also really identified that this is a big issue, and they've put quite a lot of energy into this. I mean, they've come up with a dental rescue plan as well, which is slightly more comprehensive than the government's one in terms of ideas. They also have the incentive to try and get dentists to work in areas of great need, but they've committed to trying to get an extra 700,000 urgent dental appointments, and also to reform the NHS dental contract, which dentists don't like and say basically means that the way that they're paid doesn't really reflect the work that they're doing. So that's obviously a bit more of a long-term plan. The problem is, obviously, this will cost money, and at the moment Labour had committed, the Tories have basically nicked Labour's tax plans. So we'll sort of need to find out a bit more about how much some of this would be paid for. But they do have some interesting ideas as well about introducing supervised toothbrushing in schools in areas with high tooth decay, which was sort of controversial in some ways, but I think it's quite an interesting idea, because when you talk to teachers and child health experts and that sort of thing, they always say that tooth decay is a sign of can be a sign of malnutrition, that that getting children and catching them early is a really good way to sort of build those habits for life, that sort of thing. So I think they want to try and integrate this into a sort of broader, not just getting you into the dentist, but improving children's oral health in schools and more broadly. So Labour does have a plan. I don't know whether it will fix everything, but Wes Streeting has really jumped on this and has been talking about it a lot. And I think this is something that they see is an area that they really want to make some progress in. So I would expect that they would continue to make that a priority.
That's the thing, isn't it? If it's not a political imperative for the Prime Minister, it's a political opportunity for the other side.
Exactly.
So you're leaving an open goal. Call in 6 says the only things that have trickled down from this government are cruelty, greed and corruption in all departments. Stay positive. Call in sick. On Twitter, Dave says about the nuclear veterans, remember, Joe Public, when you done the annual pop-in, hear our politicians spout their debt of gratitude to the sacrifice of armed forces. This is what they really think of us. Delay, deny, wait till they die. It's all just, can Rishi really afford? I mean, I know he's going to do it anyway. I suppose let's be more cynical about it. If Rishi does sit on his bum and do nothing, whether it's about dentistry or nuclear veterans, is it going to make the tiniest bit of difference, really? I mean, if he were to come out and say, I've found a solution for dentistry, is that going to change the polls and alter the way any general election goes? If he comes out and says, I'm going to have a public inquiry into nuclear veterans missing medical records, is that going to make enough of a difference? I suppose, to be even more cynical, you might say that there's nothing he can do at this stage, so why doesn't he just do nothing?
I think that it might not change the dial, but things can happen very quickly in politics. Like, I know that the Conservatives have been behind in the polls for a long time, and it would be very difficult for them to win a convincing majority at the next election. But if we've seen anything over the past few years, is that things can change very dramatically in a short space of time, and you never quite know. And I would wonder if you were thinking particularly about dentistry, there's a kind of pervasive narrative across at the moment that comes up all the time that Britain is broken, that nothing works here, that you can't get access to any services, that the public could just be fed up, and if you could fix something, if you could make it that, we did fix dentistry, we did fix this, maybe that would be a signifier that things were going to improve, and maybe that would shift the dial for some people. But the problem is that he's running out of time. We've only got until January 2025 to call an election. It's going to be very difficult to change anything in a big way between now and then, because these are huge problems that require long-term solutions, as Rishi said, but has not put forward any long-term solutions for anything. So I think, they're just banking on the idea that the economy, that inflation's going to fall, that people are going to feel a bit better off, that they can do a bit more tax cutting, and that will have to be enough.
Well, we'll see, won't we? Mike says the trouble with announcing plans or inquiries at this point is nobody would believe it. Anything like that will be unlikely to take effect or even begin before a general election. And then we get to the point where, all right, Rishi won't be able to fix anything of the stuff that's on his desk or in his in tray, but it comes down to the point where if he knows he's going, what's your legacy as Prime Minister going to be? Is it going to be left chaos behind, or is it going to be started the process of fixing this or doing that or repairing the other? And I suspect, that's probably why we got in to see Boris Johnson right at, I think, about 3 weeks before he had to resign. So maybe maybe we're getting to see Rishi Sunak, and that will spell the end of his time in Downing Street as well. The lotion on its skin says there's 10 to 15 million from Frank Hester that could pay for a few root canals. That would be a good use for it, wouldn't it? You wouldn't have to hand it back. You could just give it to dentistry. Nice idea. Right. Thank you very much, everybody, for taking part in that. Now, we have managed to find some good news in the world for you. Here it is. Now, it has been said for a while that the way to resolve climate change, overpopulation, then none of those things would be so bad if humans found a way to get their nutrition from sources other than meat and potatoes and ate things like insects instead, because there's loads of those and we could always do with a few less. But no one's ever really fancied chowing down on a cockroach. But now researchers from San Diego University think they've found the solution to this. They have tested, God knows how, edible insects and found that they have distinct flavours, which we already like. Queen Weaver ants, for example, get this, Lizzie, taste like nutty caramel, if that's your thing. Is this proof, do you think, Lizzie, that perhaps our food could be more sustainable and maybe we'd even get less tooth decay if we sprinkled ants on top of our cakes rather than sugar sprinkles?
Oh, it's a good point. Yeah, we could cut our sugar intake by eating sweet ants. No, I mean, I think this is quite interesting. I would say I'm not that enthusiastic about eating ants, but actually there isn't really a reason why not. It's quite interesting the way that we sort of we choose certain animals and fish, and that we're fine with eating, but certain things we aren't. And obviously the idea of eating insects feels a bit I'm a celeb. But I think if there are benefits to this that could mean that it impacts on, it helps with our battle against climate change, it helps people improve their diets, it's certainly worth exploring. But I think I might wait until they've done a bit more research before I start eating ants.
Yeah, I suspect what would happen is they'd take some ants and they'd form them through an ultra processing horrible process into some kind of like loaf cake, and then you make it look like a chocolate muffin, but it's really ants. And go, there's so many chemicals in this, I no longer want to eat the ants. I'd rather just have them raw. Thank you very much. I did hear something the other day that said, you know what, although people tend to think that dentistry in the dark ages they didn't have sugar, and so their teeth were actually pretty good. And if you dig people up from a peat bog these days, they've got a lovely set of gnashes. So unlike us, of course, which are full of fillings. So maybe we should learn something from the Dark Ages as well. Who knows? Right. Thank you, Lizzie, for taking us through that. And thank you, everyone, for taking part. Now, we will have the news agendas going on the road. Ooh! So on Wednesday, we have a special episode for you. So come back here for that. You won't want to miss it. Rishi might even be watching it. Who knows? He's got bugger all else to do. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. We will see you again on Wednesday. Until then, everyone, take care, stay safe, and we'll see you on the other side. Tatty, bye.